Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel for Jules Creations. Today I'll be showing you how to upgrade your paper bead creations by adding eyelets to finish off the ends and glazing the beads with UV resin for a beautiful high gloss finish. This will give your beads a finished professional look with a hard protective surface, water resistance, richer color, and a high gloss shine. And multiple layers can even give a glass-like glossy shine. Just a note, I recently did a tutorial for making box beads with a chapter on glazing your paper beads with varnish, just in case you want to watch that one as well. So applying UV resin to your bead is relatively simple. However, there are a lot of additional things that you need to know about working with these chemicals. If you're not familiar with working with resin, the most common types of resin are two-part epoxy resin and UV resin. The epoxy resin comes in two bottles, one with resin and one with a hardener. When the two parts are mixed together, they begin curing, but very slowly, so giving enough time to work with it. But it does need to be set for several hours or for a larger project, maybe even days. The advantage of epoxy resin is once you've poured the resin, you can cover it, let it cure, and it will have a super hard high gloss shine. UV resin cures just slightly less hard than epoxy resin. UV resin is ready to use with no mixing required. When it's left out in the air, it will start to thicken up. However, it will not completely cure until it's been exposed under UV light. The UV light can come from a UV lamp or even sunlight. The biggest advantage of UV resin is that when it's exposed to the UV light, it can cure within minutes, so projects can be processed very quickly. And just a quick note about UV resin. Since UV resin cures under UV light, I recommend not using it on sunglasses or anything that will be in the sun for long periods of time, because that will cause overexposure and turn the resin dark. UV resin comes in different varieties. For glazing beads, I recommend a UV resin that is a hard type with low viscosity so it will pour easily. Safety first, you will want to protect your skin and eyes from the UV or ultraviolet light and from the chemicals in the UV resin. I recommend some medical gloves. They are solid, so they protect your skin from the UV light and from the resin getting on your skin. I like to use nitrile gloves, about 6 mil in weight, but you can use whatever solid gloves you like. Secondly, you'll want to protect your eyes. Most likely you'll be looking at the bead while it's curing under the UV lamp. The UV light can be harmful to your eyes, so I recommend a pair of UV protective eyeglasses, and they come in all different price ranges from super cheap to elaborate. You'll also want to make sure your work area is well ventilated. Those chemical fumes do get in the air even if they are odorless. Okay, let's talk about UV lamps. There are many types of UV lamps ranging from tiny pin lights to flashlights to portable lamps to nail UV lamps. Pin lights give a small amount of UV light, but they must be used very close to your project. UV flashlights come in a small or larger sizes and can be used a bit farther away, but usually need to be held or mounted. Portable lamps usually have a stand, so they don't need to be held, but they only sit about 2 inches above your work surface and they only stay on for a few minutes at a time. Most portable UV lamps run off of a USB plug, and they also need a power source nearby to plug it into, such as a portable charger. A UV nail lamp has a normal power plug and usually has multiple time settings ranging from 2 to 5 minutes and also a setting for always on. The area inside the lamp is much larger than a portable lamp. I prefer the UV nail lamp so that when the beads have a final cure of 15 minutes, I don't have to keep pushing the button to turn it back on. My personal preference is a lamp where all the light is kept internally. This helps the light to be more intense and it helps keep the UV rays internal instead of all over my table and in my eyes. I even add a piece of foil over the front to keep all the light inside, and then I cut a little door that I can open when I'm rotating the beads inside the lamp while curing them. Using any resin has a potential to be really messy, so I highly recommend a smooth silicone mat for your workspace, and it can catch all the drippings, and then when you're done, you can cure it under your UV light and then just peel the hardened drippings off. These come in a variety of size and colors. You can just lay it down and use it as is, or you might like a trick that I use for my layout. Let me show you. I purchased one clear, smooth silicone mat that was about 9 inch by 12 inch, and from that I cut out two pieces that were 4 inch by 6 inch. And because silicone mats have no support, I made two supports of my own from plates of glass that were 4 inch by 6 inch, and I got those from some photo frames from a craft store. I taped the glass edges to prevent getting cut, and then I laid the silicone pieces on top. Now I have two workable silicone trays that can be moved around easily. I use one to catch the drippings when applying the resin to the beads, and after curing each bead for 1 minute, I'll add it to that second tray until all of them are done. Then I'll put the whole tray with all the beads into the UV lamp for one final cure of 15 minutes. Now for applying the resin to the bead, a lot of people may use a paintbrush of some sort. I don't like to use a paintbrush because the resin gets all stuck inside the bristles and it's hard to clean. And then on occasion the bristles come out and get stuck in your project. Instead, I like to use a silicone stir stick with a flat tip. And the flat tip helps to shape the resin while you're applying it. And you can easily clean it up. You can just cure it under a UV lamp at the end of your session and then peel the resin off. You'll want your bead to be secure so that it doesn't move around while applying the resin. The best way to do that is to put it on a wooden skewer or toothpick. I'll explain more about that later. Now, when we first make our paper beads, they're just paper objects with unfinished edges. This is where adding eyelets or grommets come in, and adding eyelets to the ends of your beads will make it look more finished and make the edges stronger, plus it'll have a clean, more appealing look. So if you're wondering what size of eyelet to use, the rule of thumb is to use an eyelet that is about a half millimeter to 1 millimeter smaller than the whole of the bead. For example, if you're using a bead roller or a knitting needle and it has a 4 millimeter diameter, you'll want to use a 3 millimeter eyelet. There are a lot of bead rollers on the market, and of course there are other tools you can use to make the beads. But these are just the ones that I am using, and I know a lot of people use these. So this little section is for those of you who are using this type of bead roller. These are numbered, but I was surprised that the numbers did not reflect the millimeter size. So what I did was I got a whole bunch of different sized eyelets to test them out to see which ones go with what. If you happen to have these type of bead rollers, they come in number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I pulled the 3 out because I didn't have any eyelets that worked well. So I have the 2, 4, 5, and 6. And when I matched them up with the eyelets, I made a little note with my eyelets of which bead roller size it matches. So just for you, the number 2 uses the 2 millimeter eyelet, the number 4 uses the 3 millimeter eyelet, the number 5 uses a 4 millimeter eyelet, and the number 6 uses a 5 millimeter eyelet. Of course, that's just these particular bead rollers, and I know there's a lot of people that use these. So that's how I keep track of which eyelet fits which bead roller. Now, as another rule of thumb, those sizes I called out to you are for beads with flat edges. If you have a bead that has a tapered edge, the size eyelets I called out may stick out beyond the paper on the ends. So instead, you will want to go down one more size to see if it fits, and usually it does. So this bead will actually fit a 4 millimeter, but because it's tapered, I'll be using a 3 millimeter eyelet instead. For my preference, I like to use a leather cording, so the 5 millimeter eyelets can fit nicely on the 4 millimeter cording, and the 3 and 4 millimeter eyelets fit well on the 2 millimeter cording. And then the 2 millimeter eyelets are really small, so they fit best on a wire. And you can use a thin wire or a really thick wire, like a thick colored wire, whatever you want to use. Of course, you can use whatever you like to string up your beads. There are cording in various colors, ropes, fine chain, string, macrame cord, and so on. So the eyelets are available in small packets by size, or you can get a set of several sizes mixed together. When attaching the eyelets, you'll want to use something a bit stronger than regular glue because it will use a tiny bit and it needs to be strong. Some sort of super glue will work best. I prefer B7000 because it has a nice tiny pinpoint for applying the glue. It also dries with some flexibility so it won't snap off easily. Now before we start gluing, I want to show you a little trick. The B7000 does dry pretty quickly, so if you plan to do a whole batch of beads, setting the tube down without the cap leaves the tube exposed to air and then it'll start air drying. So to prevent that, what I do is I take a piece of paper towel or a napkin and smush it down into the bottom of a cup and get it wet. And then between beads, I'll set it in the cup with the tip down on the wet paper, and that stops it from drying out. And you can use this tip with your glue bottle as well when you're making the paper beads. If for some reason it starts to dry out and you find that the glue doesn't want to squeeze out, what you can do is clean the tip with a little piece of wire. This is a 26 gauge wire, which fits perfectly into the B7000 tip. So you can just slide it in and stir it around, and then that'll clear the tube. So what I'm going to do is apply some glue just to the top of the edge, and we don't want it to get down inside the hole, just on the tip of the edge. And we don't need a whole lot, just enough for it to adhere to the eyelet. Then I use my self-closing tweezers to hold the lip of the eyelet and slide the eyelet down into place. Now, of course, you can use your fingers, but that's hard to see through that when you're doing it, and it usually gets really messy when the glue gets on your gloves. Okay, so that fits perfectly. And I usually let the glue set for a few minutes while I work on the other beads and then come back to glue the other side. And let's flip it over and do the same on the other side. And you can see it's already getting a little bit thicker from leaving it out. I should have put it into the cup. And that is done. And when you set the bead down, you'll want to make sure it's standing straight upright. And if it needs adjusting, you can gently push down from the top and tilt it until it's straight. And that way you know the eyelet is sitting at a right angle to the bead. And once you have both sides glued, I recommend letting it set at least 20 minutes longer to dry further before we start the glazing. So before I show you how to apply the UV resin, let me show you how I have my workstation set up so you have an idea of what's what. I have my UV nail lamp with the foil on the front with a little door for sliding the beads while curing. I have two silicone trays that I explained how to make earlier, my silicone stirring tool with a flat tip, gloves, resin, and some skewers to hold the beads, and a really cheap timer. Now the UV resin may be used right out of the bottle, but it may be a bit thick when it's cold. You can gently warm the bottle under some warm water, not hot water, or just put it between your thighs for a few minutes. Yes, I said that. While that's warming, let's prepare our beads to be glazed. We want to be able to handle our bead with nothing touching them while applying the UV resin and while curing. Depending on the size of the bead's hole, you can use a wooden skewer. Obviously, this one is too big and it won't work. I do like these a lot. These are called triangular cocktail picks. It's skinny at the top and fatter at the bottom, so it'll slide to a certain point and then stop. And these work perfect for a medium-sized bead. If you have a really tiny bead, even smaller than this, you might be able to use a toothpick. Those are just a few options. We also want to make sure the bead is tight on the stick so that it doesn't move around when applying the resin. Now, if we're careful, the resin should not get onto the wooden stick. But if by small chance it does, the bead will cure to the stick. But since it's wood, it's porous and it's easier to push the bead off wood than it would be if we were using plastic. In that event, you can bend the stick slightly to release it. You may lose a stick, but you can salvage the bead by trimming off the excess with wire cutters. And just a note, if you're going to glaze a box bead or a bead with an eyelet, the easiest way to hold it is using scissor clamps to clamp onto the loop, and this will hold the bead without touching the bead while applying the UV resin. So we have our beads on their sticks, our resin, our work area has a silicone mat, another silicone mat or tray to place our beads after our 1 minute curing, and then our second tray will hold all the beads and go into our UV lamp for a final 15-minute cure. So let me explain the process first and then we'll actually do it. We'll start by adding a couple drops of resin and then set the bottle down to cover it right away to keep the resin from thickening. And immediately the resin is going to start running down to the bottom. So right away, grab your silicone stick and start rotating the bead while spreading the resin around. We want to make sure to also cover the edges on both sides, but not letting the resin touch the wooden stick. Once the resin is spread out, it'll have less chance of dripping, but we still want to continue to rotate the bead so the resin won't build up in one place and leave a thick blob. Then we'll push the timer button and put the bead into the UV lamp while continuing to rotate for 1 minute until it cures. So here we go. Let's grab our bead and we're going to squeeze just a couple drops of resin on top. Set down the resin bottle, cover it immediately, grab the silicone stir stick and hold it underneath the bead and start spinning the bead to spread the resin evenly around the bead. You can slide the silicone stir stick horizontally to get the resin to the edges, but not onto the wooden stick. The last step, use the silicone stick to make tiny horizontal strokes repeatedly till you've gotten all the way around the bead, and this will make the resin spread more smoothly and you'll have a nice shine. Keep rotating the bead slowly, but don't stop. Push the timer button and turn on the lamp, and put the bead inside the lamp while continuing to rotate the bead for the entire 1 minute to pre-glaze them. After 1 minute, the bead won't be dripping anymore, but it's still too soft to touch with your fingers. Once it's cured, hold the bead vertically over a clean area of your second silicone mat, and with your fingertips, gently push the edge of the bead to slide it off the stick and set it down onto the mat. And you can do a second layer if you wish, but it's not necessary. And the final cure is going to make the beads very hard. So before that, I recommend to just do a test that the bead holes are clear so that it'll slide easily onto the necklace or bracelet. Now for the box beads, it's done just a little bit differently since the surfaces are flat. To add the UV resin, we'll be doing it in 2 rounds. The first part will cover 3 surfaces, and then the second part will cover the remaining 3 surfaces. First, we'll hold the box bead by using some scissor clamps on the loop, making sure the scissor clamps do not touch the bead in any way. And then we start by adding a tiny drop onto each of 2 sides of the bead, and then smooth it around all the way to the edges and over to a third side. Again, since the resin will start to drip, we want to work very quickly and just place the bead under the UV lamp while continuing to rotate it for 1 minute. Then for the next round, do the other 3 sides and again, place the bead under the UV lamp while continuing to rotate it for 1 minute more. And before setting it to the side, we want to check the loops and just make sure there's no resin inside the loop. Try sliding a pin through it and wiggle it around and make sure that it's clear. If the loop has resin in it and we've only cured it for 1 minute, the resin will still be soft enough to push the excess resin through the loop with a thumbtack. And then if needed, you can pull it off with some small pliers. When we have all our beads coated and placed on our second silicone tray, then we can move the tray with all our beads to the UV lamp for a final cure. And if you're glazing the pyramid beads, it's similar to the box beads since the surfaces are flat. We'll start with the base of the pyramid. The reason for this is that it will secure the eye pin or the loop so that when we start glazing the sides, it won't be spinning around on us. So for the whole process, we'll be using the loop at the top of the pyramid. So grab the top loop with our scissor clamps at a right angle to the bead and turn the bottom surface upward so that it's flat while we apply the resin. And then we'll put a small circle of resin around the outer edge of the surface. Then with our silicone stick, gently push the resin outward all the way to the edges. Then push it carefully toward the middle until it just barely touches the loop. But make sure that it doesn't go inside the loop. And if it does get inside the loop, you can clear that out with a toothpick. If you didn't notice it and you've already pre-cured it for 1 minute, the resin will still be soft enough that you can use a safety pin to push the resin out. So to cure the base, we won't be rotating the bead, but rather just hold the bead under the UV lamp for 1 minute and pre-cure it. Next, we'll be doing the sides of the beads. So let's adjust our scissor clamps so that they point directly at the top of the pyramid. And this will make it easier to rotate the scissor clamps while the bead is curing. Then we'll apply a drop on each side and then spreading it around to all the edges. Now I usually do 2 sides at a time. You can do it however you like, but continue until all 4 sides are covered and make sure you get those side edges really good too. And you'll want to work quickly while you're applying the UV resin so that the resin doesn't sit and build up in one spot. Start rotating the bead continually and then continue while you put it under the UV lamp for 1 minute so that it can pre-cure. And once you have all of your beads pre-glazed, place them all in the UV lamp for another 15 minutes for that final cure. I like to do my cleanup while the beads are curing for 15 minutes. So first I'll put my working silicone tray and silicone stick under the UV lamp for about 2 minutes, and I'll show you why in a minute. All right, and let's place all of our pre-glazed beads under the UV lamp, making sure none of them touch. Then turn your UV lamp setting to always on and set your timer for 15 minutes and let it cure. When they're done, we'll let them cool about 2 to 3 minutes before taking them out. So while they're curing, let's go ahead and peel off all that cured resin from our silicone mat and stick. And we got most of it, but do you see all these little tiny specks that would take forever to peel off? Well, I have a trick. I use box tape. It's super sticky, so you can just lay a piece over the silicone mat and rub it with something flat like a popsicle stick and then peel it off. And all those little tiny pieces come right up. And now your silicone mat is super clean and ready for your next project. Okay, our beads are done and ready to use to make your own beautiful jewelry or keychains or whatever you like. And you have a few options when using UV resin. In a silicone mixing bowl, you can add a mixture of UV resin and some additives such as metallic powder or colored mica powder or fine iridescent glitter, alcohol ink, or resin pigments, and I'm sure there are others. And bear in mind if using the alcohol ink and pigments, they are really concentrated. So you may want to put just a little dab onto some foil and then just touch it with a toothpick and then just add a hint of color. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and I'll be making more soon. And if you like this video, please give a thumbs up And if you have any questions or ideas on a video you'd like to see, feel free to leave a comment below. And subscribe if you'd like to be notified when I release any new videos. There's also a link below to all of my Jules Creations links that you can check out. Enjoy and never be bored.